Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I would kindly ask you to take your seats. It's wonderful to see you all. And I'm just appreciating now that this is a great height to be at. Not because I'm vertically challenged myself, but I can actually see everybody's face. So I hope that everybody can see me. You're all very welcome. We're about to kick off POF 2026. So, bienvenidos, Céad Míle Fáilte, for any of the Irish in the audience, which translates actually as 100,000 welcomes. And I couldn't picture a better phrase that encapsulates what today represents. And it's an absolute privilege that I can stand here on behalf of the three organizing communities, that of PFMD, EPF, and UPATI, and to welcome you to this global gathering. And it's a gathering of leaders, and it's a gathering that nurtures leadership for patient engagement, but also for the first time in the wonderful city of Seville. So we have partners joining us from all over the globe, and we'll give you a little flavor of just who is in the room in a moment. But in the spirit of POF, we'll also be getting you to work, because this isn't just any ordinary event. POF is a very special space that is designed, curated, co-developed, but ultimately puts everybody to work, because we are here to celebrate, we are here to co-create, but ultimately we want to see those outputs turn into outcomes for those who we ultimately are serving, and that's the global patient community. So for someone like me, who's been lucky enough to experience POF a number of times, I've had some great experience, I've had some challenging experience, I've done some strange things at POF. But for me personally, my leadership journey represents somebody who has come from a local, regional, national, and now global level. And for me personally, I've learned an awful lot at POF. But I think the one thing for me that I have learned to do is be generous, but be generous with my listening. And that's the point that I would probably most emphasize today, because generosity is not just a nice thing. It's actually something that you actually have to practice in everything that you do. So generosity leads to wonderful things happening. And when I self-check myself at POF, it's to do that I'm generous with the information and the knowledge and the context that I have. Because context for me brings power. And one of the things we're here to discuss is embedding patient engagement as infrastructure. And part of that conversation will involve sharing of power. And if context is power, then how do I, as an individual, show up in every conversation that I'm having at POF? And if the person I'm having the conversation with goes back home or away from that conversation with more clarity and more context that I was able to share, well, that's a good thing. But my self-check is, if it's not happening, then all of the frameworks around patient engagement that we need, and we do need them, they're not what's necessary. It's behavioral change is what we need, and behavioral change at leadership. And we're going to be touching on a lot of these issues throughout the 3 days, 3 wonderful days at POF. But I just wanted to give you my own personal experience from that perspective. But we're also here because of the 3 organizations that have come together. And all 3, EPF, UPATI, and PFMD, were founded on the belief that patients should not be passive recipients of healthcare, and they should be active partners and equal in shaping healthcare. And I'm here to tell you that that belief is being realized. It is no longer on the margins. It is becoming embedded across research, development, regulation, HTA, care delivery, and policy. And that progress is because of many people in this room. People who I've known, people who we've lost, who are no longer with us. But we stand on their shoulders and we further their rich legacy. And that's what PIOF has evolved to, because the evolution of PIOF reflects a lot of our own evolutions as patient advocates, as patient engagement professionals, as people who keep showing up, because to not have the conversations that we're going to have, the consequences of not having these conversations are just too great, the negative consequences of that. So I congratulate everybody in this room. There's people here who I admire greatly, people who kept pushing when maybe collaboration felt inconvenient, people who understood that meaningful partnership, it's not a communications exercise, it's actually a systems change strategy. And those are the people that I want to work with, that my team wants to work with, that everybody wants to work with. And it's wonderful that we've created a space for those connections and joining the dots that represents PIOF. So to finish, I will just give you a quick flavor of who is actually in the room. So we have 185 people in this room from all 5 continents of the globe. The vast majority, I think about 55% are from Europe, 20% are from the Americas, with 10% coming from Asia, 10% coming from Africa, and 10% coming from, oh wait, I've actually combined the Americas. So we have this wonderful opportunity to form connections and to generate collective leadership together. Let's make the most of it. The other thing that we've responded to this year is very much that we've opened doors to new communities and new audiences from the last couple of years. The investment community, whether it's venture capital or indeed impact investor or indeed philanthropic investors, they're here. Our regulators and HTA representatives are here again, and that relationship is building year on year on year. We have more youth and young patient advocates in the room than ever before, and we're joining dots between both sides of the Atlantic in that regard, and I'm delighted to welcome all of the young patients again to PIOF. And lastly, but not leastly, we've responded, and EPF has been leading the charge on this. In terms of the outcomes from last year, we're very much targeted at the policy level, and we have more policy makers coming to PIOF this year than any other year. So we have the EPF roundtable on day 3, and that represents real progress in terms of embedding patient engagement and involvement in health policy. So to finish, I just wanted to say one word, and it's about optimism. And it's something that I get from working with my team, and I know that Maria and Valentina get from working with their teams. And it's something that is probably something that people feel they might struggle to be optimistic in these certain times. But optimism, it's not denying that things can be difficult. It's the decision to keep building anyway. And for me, in the face of uncertainty, optimism oriented towards a longer time horizon is valuable and it's fundamental. And many influential figures have argued quite correctly that long-term optimism is not just descriptive, it's quantitative. and it helps shape a better future by motivating the search for solutions. I can't think of a better word to describe what PIOF gives me and what I hope everybody coming here, whether you're coming for the first time or the 9th time, that you will leave here much more optimistic about what progress actually looks like. So one thing I haven't done is I haven't given you a flavor of the behind the scenes as to what makes this event so special. And we're led by our program committee members from all across the globe and supported by the 3 teams. And in association with our program committee, we have our sponsors and partners. And I want to take this moment to acknowledge their continued and long-standing collaboration to make sure that this safe and brave space not just exists, but thrives. Because I know that the model of collaboration that represents PIOF is not all that easy for a lot of these supporters, but they still keep showing up, and that's hugely, hugely valued. Next slide, I think. Okay, so in the spirit of PIOF, we're going to get you to, first of all, identify if you're coming to PIOF for the first time. So please raise your hands if you're coming for the first time. So everybody else, I want you to look around and identify how close you are to that individual that you've just identified, okay? So you can put your hands down. I'm going to see now, for those who are returning, can you please raise your hands as well? Okay, so it's about a 50-50 split. So I think you know where I'm going with this. There should be one newbie for every one returning. So, and you have 60 seconds. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, I'm going to ask you to, for the returning people, to identify yourself to a newbie and tell them what one good thing from PIOF that you get, that met your expectation, that keeps you coming back, that will hopefully inspire those who are just getting a flavor of it for the first time to experience what that feels like. So you have 60 seconds. Go. Thank you. There's plenty of time to keep going. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So the first piece of connectivity has already happened. We're now going to talk about architecting the global standard of patient partnerships. I'm delighted to be joined by our panelists who come from as diverse backgrounds as many people in the room. And we're going to probably talk about something that doesn't actually exist. And that is essentially patient partnership in the permanent machinery of global health. So we're going to challenge each other about what has worked. We're going to maybe be honest about what can happen in the near term or medium term future. But ultimately, we're looking to inspire all of the sessions that all of you that will be coming subsequent to this throughout the course of PIOF, because there is a global context to everything that we're doing. And by embedding and putting in an infrastructure that allows meaningful partnership at the global level, that's what we're here, ultimately, that's what everybody wants to see. But there are distinct challenges to that. So we're building on last year's foundation as well, because last year we were at probably what you might call the beginning of the storm. We were hearing very open and honest perspectives about what the impact of the changes in the global policies, and indeed individual countries' policies, were having on the global health architecture and ecosystem. But now we have to talk about the how rather than the urgency of combating the storm. And we really want to get concrete here about designing and co-designing the new systems that are emerging. And I know that there was a call at the WHA, the World Health Assembly, for greater social participation. And there were what you might call the seedlings of what would be a new architecture emerging. And that's the opportunity for patient engagement. So our response to the storm is not to retreat. It's to formalize, and that architecting patient partnership into the permanent machinery of global health, it's so that it's no longer just an optional extra, but a resilient, non-negotiable standard that can weather any storm. So today we're here to define and to describe three aspects of that. There are many different parts of that global architecture. And the three aspects that we focused on in our prep meetings are the specific structural enablers of patient engagement, the new collaboration models, and the qualities of leadership. And those are the three building blocks that are probably required to not just navigate the current landscape of uncertainty, but move from what can often feel like ad hoc consultation to a structural continuum of code governance. So, we've had a couple of discussions in the lead up to this as panelists, and it's actually very obvious that in the next 30 minutes we're not going to solve this issue, but what we will do is give you really concrete examples that you can take forward into your sessions of where the global context is relevant or not, as the case may be for that. So to kick things off, I'm going to ask Bethany to give us your perspective. So Bethany, Harvard Medical School, Brigham and Women's, the Lancet Commission on Person-Centered Care. Mm-hmm. You've moved from being a primary care physician to being more of a generalist and a global health specialist. And you're 34? So from your perspective, what's the messages that you want to give our audience today?
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Please excuse my voice. I like to talk a lot, and I'm going to have to do a lot more listening, I think, over the next few days, as I've lost my voice after World Health Assembly a few weeks ago. Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a real pleasure. I'm really excited to get to know many of you. Before I jump to the messages, I just want to take a moment to introduce myself a little bit more as some context for my answers. I think what was said was right. I don't really fit neatly into a stakeholder box. I never have. I am a physician. I'm a health systems researcher. I've always identified as an advocate. And most importantly, and potentially most radically in this time, I identify as an idealist. And that's having come from management consulting as well. I'm a recovering management consultant. I've done it all. And I have nevertheless pursued this career at the intersection of community engagement and real health system reform, because I genuinely believe that we have the knowledge, we have the skills, we have the tools to be able to radically recenter health and care systems around what works for real lives. And part of that is equitable access, part of that's affordability, and a big part of that is trust. And that's the context for which we embarked on the Lancet Global Health Commission on People-Centered Care. It's really a knowledge generation and synthesis exercise on what it takes to build systems around people's lives. And that requires genuinely diverse perspectives across gender, countries, professions, all sort of aspects of diversity. And not just because that's the right thing to do, as Derek was saying, but because we fundamentally believe the answers will be better and the solutions will be more sustainable when you have diverse voices able to meaningfully contribute. And that's where it gets tricky. I think one of the things that we've tried to do is be very intentional about how we've designed this commission with in mind that the biggest failure mode for me was if we said we were going to do meaningful engagement and we didn't do it. The people with lived experience who make up 40% of our commissioners said that was tokenistic. That would be ultimate failure mode, even if we had a wonderful report. And some of the choices we made at the start were to try and do that, to have that diverse table. We have 32 commissioners, they're from all different countries, clinicians, advocates, policymakers, researchers, but we still have gaps, and we have to be honest about that. The way that we published, we had a transparent and de-identified selection process, but it did bias years of experience. So we are lacking younger voices amongst our commissioners. We offered financial compensation, but we also have to acknowledge that to be part of these research processes is often something people do in addition to their day job. And all of us who are represented on the commission do benefit from a certain amount of privilege that allows us to be in this sort of global elite space. So not getting carried away and thinking, yeah, well, we've made it diverse, there's a seat at the table, it's not enough, there's still people who aren't represented. Shall I continue with some challenges, or I have two more things I want to say.
Okay.
Very briefly.
Yep.
The first is, I think that one of the challenges in meaningful engagement we've had to overcome is working out the balance between creating safe spaces to build community and integrating and not having siloed conversations. At the start, we had a working group for lived experience. Quickly realized that wasn't the right approach and actually needed to be more integrated. I think also we've had difficulties in balancing the need for quick outputs and research questions with the time that it takes to build relationships. I always say, like, we only want to ever move at the speed of trust. And unfortunately, that's not just a commission problem, that's a global health problem. Our timelines for projects, investment returns do not always match the time required to make true systems change, to build the relationships required to do that. So that's something we are still struggling with, but I think is a very tangible lesson as funders in the room to think about project timelines. And the last thing I'll say is we have to pay a lot of attention to whose knowledge counts. We say a lot and, can talk the talk. Lived experience is evidence. Lived experience is expertise. But actually making that real and taking that expertise beyond anecdote and context for the technical work of measurement frameworks and literature reviews, whatever other things we're doing, is really hard and is not resolved, actually. It requires a lot of relationship work, a lot of mindful facilitation. Those are practices I'm happy and excited to share, but I think we have to be very honest about how easy it is to say, let's do meaningful engagement, and how hard it really is when rubber hits the road.
Thank you, Bethany. So, and we have to actually acknowledge that Bethany will actually, I've given Bethany plenty of time there because she does have to step off the panel just to be on a call at past. But I do wish to come back to you on your points. I'll turn to Konstantina. So Konstantina, from the EPF youth group, from EPF board, but also Konstantina as a young patient advocate. What are your messages to the audience today, having maybe even touched on what we've heard from Bethany?
Yeah, so if we want to talk about the architecting the global standard of patient partnership, I think it is not complete if young patients are not part of it. And decisions without life stage awareness are incomplete. So young patients are not just a younger voice, a younger version of the patient voice. They bring a different decision-making lens, and that is why it is because we are we're managing healthcare together with so many different factors than older generation, like education, first jobs, all this stress, different hormones, reproduction, physical health, sexual health, and a lot of the medications or treatments are not aware of that. So what is acceptable on paper, it is not always acceptable in real life for young patients. And in a lot of the clinical trials right now, or stratification of side effects or research, they are being made, like they think up to 20 years, and then what is? And a young patient, if now I'm 29, for example, I started treatment right now, in 20 years I will be 49, which I will be perfect to just continue my life, right? And if a person is 20 years old, then in 15 years, they would be 35, fully capable of starting a family, just continuing their life. But they don't look for those in clinical trials. And I will give you an example, for example, for myself. I live with type 1 diabetes for 20 years. So I am right now in the very high-risk group of cardiovascular disease. And with my doctor, we said that it's the best for me to take statin as preventative. But statin, the number one side effect is muscle pain. And muscle pain, if you're 50 or 60, that you're not moving so much, you don't have this social life as a 20-year-old, it's okay. I mean, it is bad, but it's not so bad. But for me right now, it causes me, it is a huge impact, because I might not go as much as I want to, I might not have this energy, or it can affect my social life, which is important for me right now. And of course, my relationship too. So, yeah. So if we thought about it beforehand, or if we thought that young patients might be the market of this product, then it will be different for me. And also with cancer, with chemotherapy, they don't even discuss about reproduction after 10 or 15 years. They just talk about, the question is, what will my life be in like 5 days or 5 months, and not what will my life be in 15 or 20 years. And young patients bring attention to the long tail of the treatment, which is very important. And as Bethany said, that you're missing from the Commission's young patients, it is because often in these applications, you're requiring a lot of expertise, of 20 years of professional experience. So we are disqualified before even we apply. And we bring a different perspective, but it is valid, it is valuable for the discussions. And I think a lot of things need to change before we even start discussing about the global standard.
Well, I think you've certainly given us plenty of nuggets that for anybody in the room who's even somewhat doubting the value of youth advocates or even youth or young patient voices, I think you're a shining example of that, and your work at the EMA as well on behalf of EPF, I think gives you that broader perspective, that where you can bring your personal life experience into a decision-making process, and that's ultimately what we want more of. So thank you.
No, thank you also to EPF, because it is we need to highlight the organizations and people who are always putting young patients at front. And I'm not representing the young patients, for example, in this steering committee, in the steering group of EMA, but EPF trusted me, and EMA also trusted me to bring my perspective, and it is very important for me. I felt heard and I felt valued, which is very rare.
Fantastic. Somebody write that down. I'm going to pivot to Ravi, but thank you again, Konstantina. Ravi, you know an awful lot about social participation and the architecture of social participation, and your work at the WHO Commission is very much focused on sub-Saharan, Southeast Asia, but also your background is also in Latin America as well.
Just a bit, yes.
So you're a global health analyst, and you've been analyzing health systems for quite some time. And in terms of the way things are shifting now versus where the opportunity for patient engagement is, are there examples that you've seen, either community-led or where institutions have maybe partnered with communities, that social participation can actually be lived and breathed through patient engagement? Is that something that you can talk?
Sure. Let me give that a shot, Derek. A few things. First, there was a sign that said WHO Civil Society Commission. I am not WHO. I'm like you. We're a civil society, right? So don't look at me in some other way. But as civil society members, some of us are part of a commission that's hosted by WHO, and that's that Civil Society Commission. Its mandate is to help WHO talk with the rest of the world, because WHO is siloed from the rest of the world. It only talks to ministries of health. They've had 80 years of doing that relatively successfully, and they recognize they need to do better. So that's just a caution. If you want to know more about the commission or want to join, find me later. There's several others. Maybe just put your hands up real quick so people know that they can ask you questions, because we do have several good people here as well. I'll come to social participation, but just as we're talking about this WHO Civil Society Commission, I'll highlight one example of where we've been able to do things, bringing people together, bringing organizations together. The Commission, right now, it does work at a global level, and we're working hard to get that work at the regional level, and WHO has 6 regional offices, and at the country level. Right now, we're not there, so I don't have those examples for the Commission's point of view. But just last year, IAPO, International Association of Patient Organizations, worked with the Commission to convene an online gathering in advance of launching the patient charter. And so that was a way of, number one, bringing our people together to have a communication in advance of that Congress that then launched the charter. Number two, they got WHO to sit up and be aware that this is what the rest of the world is doing. And now some people in WHO are aware of patient voices, a patient charter, some level of patient activism, and they didn't know before. So I think that's really, really good. And that's an example of how when we come together, we collaborate, and the Commission is one vehicle for all of us to do that. Social participation, and it sounds like a nice term. It actually means something very specific. And 2 years ago, in May of 2 years ago, 2024, several of WHO's member states, governments, came together and they proposed a resolution on social participation. It was unanimously ratified at the World Health Assembly, meaning it's now part of, let's say, international health law. It puts certain requirements on governments to put in place mechanisms so that those governments open up space to talk with their own people about what is the health system, how would we want to change it, what resources are required, where are the priorities, etc. It puts requirements in WHO, and it calls on us, broadly civil society and patient organizations, to also step up. So it's been 2 years, there have been some progress, and there's also been some challenges, which is natural, and I'll actually just talk a little bit about those. So Brazil, Thailand, Slovenia have done tremendous work because those governments are already willing, and they were among the co-sponsors for that resolution. They wanted to get this out and make it a norm for governments to really engage with their people and not just leave it to bureaucracies, not leave it to technocrats, but actually bring in lived experience, bring in patient voices, hear from people. You know, Last year, for instance, I tried to go to a facility. I managed to get my appointment, but the medicines weren't there. They sent me down the road. Those kind of stories are important for people to hear when they're making decisions. There's been a lot of work in India at the community level. And I think that's very important because as much as we may be global health experts and part of that, the convening that can bring us from around the world here, the real work is happening at the community level. And in India, for instance, there are groups, Maharashtra is one of the Western states. Across Maharashtra, the government has recognized that people come together and talk with their local health authorities about how that local health authority is going to spend its money in the coming 12 months. That's a fantastic example of citizen-led health budgeting. We're trying to copy some of that and bring it to Africa. But what we've got going on already is that in Kenya, for instance, again at the county and other subnational levels, not across the country, it's just starting, but we're getting people to have that same kind of piece. And I'll come back to what Bethany was referring to, trust. There's been a lot of loss of trust because of the way our politics operate in the world and our countries these days. And specifically in health, COVID-19 eroded a lot of trust. People have a lot of conspiracy theories or doubts about, are these vaccines really for us? Why couldn't we have masks earlier? There are a lot of doubts. And quite honestly, we've not overcome them, those of us in the health space. So there's a lot of work to be done. But what makes social participation work is trust. And it really, in Kenya, what we're seeing is that when citizen groups, patient groups, advocacy groups come to their local officials and say, this is what we want, the local official is quite willing because they're strapped, and if they can get someone to help them, that's fantastic. They don't have the leatherback chair and the big desk that they can just sit and keep away from real people. They are engaged directly. So that's something that's worked. Where it has failed, and again, I'll use Kenya as an example, and I know we've got two other people from Kenya, so you'll know what I'm talking about. 3 years ago, the government put in place a reform for our National Hospital Insurance Fund, and they're transforming it into the Social Health Authority. They pushed it through, and we know why. I won't go into all the diagnoses behind that push, but we came together as civil society, and we put forward our own very instant critiques, because we had a matter of 3 weeks to get a response in, and only because the court forced the government to pause and listen to people. They made it tokenistic. They put in place the process. We had an online button to submit our responses. We went ahead and put our papers on the desk and got a stamp on the papers, and they discarded it. So the social participation is not a guarantee, even though our own government has signed on. And we have to choose where we want to push those buttons, fight those battles. I'm suggesting that we can do it much more effectively, subnationally, locally, and at the community level. But that's to build up so we can do it nationally. And then one last point I'll say is that right now, as patient groups, we're all working to get our agendas forward. But we're not doing it without a history. And so many of us have learned from those before us. I really salute those in the HIV/AIDS movement because they face discrimination not just from governments, they face it from all of us. We looked at them like they're strange people. Why do they have that strange disease, etc.? And I'm talking collectively. After so many people died, after so many people raised their voices, after so many people kept on with that issue, they actually moved the world. And they actually forced the world to create an entire UN agency to address HIV/AIDS. That HIV movement made very widespread the idea that there's nothing about us without us. But they didn't invent it. They've borrowed that from the disability movement that preceded them. And we can then take it forward because in the end, with all the changes in the world, we need to have a patient movement. And I think a patient movement is where we need to go next. I can speak about the commission where I happen to serve right now, or the social participation resolution, but ultimately it's going to be people power that makes these changes because the world is changing a lot. We have an opportunity to influence it, but there are powers in place that will be against people. And I think as a people's movement, a patient's movement, that's the way we need to go.
Thank you, Ravi. That's I knew you'd be good. So thank you. And I'm glad you got some sleep last night as well. Louise, so we're going to turn to the other bedrock of what we believe would form the foundations of meaningful partnership with patients, and that's collaborative models. But allied to collaborative models are the types of leadership capabilities that we believe not just patient advocates need, but those that they partner with need in terms of systems leadership. Are you able, from the Bosch Health Campus and your experience, able to give us some good concrete examples of where that has made impact through new collaborative models that you've been funding?
Well, I'll certainly try. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure and honour to be here with PIOF. So I work for the Bosch Health Campus, but I also lead an international network called CIANA, which is active in the UK, Switzerland and Germany, and we're looking for new fellows right now, so that's a blatant plug, I apologise. At CIANA, we have a content focus, which each year works on, but we also focus on something called systems leadership. And systems leadership is, we use the definition from David Nabarro, who is from the Kennedy School. And maybe just to provide a little bit of context, if I may, I'm going to take some time just to explain what we actually understand by systems leadership so that we're all on the same page. And for us, there are 3 levels. So the first level is the personal level. And this is where collaboration between individuals can take place. This is where a lot of the learning happens. Trust is built, something that was echoed before. And there is action amongst stakeholders. Then we move up to the community level, and this is where the coalition building starts. A lot of advocacy takes place, and there's alignment between organisations before taking action. And then we have the systems leadership, which is where together complex challenges are tackled, not necessarily by individual people or individual organisations, but in a coordinated fashion, either to reach a common purpose. The common purpose has to be the central aspect of the systems leadership, but this leadership isn't done by the people who are doing the actions, but it's at a systems level. I hope that's sort of clear. And part of that is empowering others to take action or coordinating the action at individual or community level. So why have I taken the time to explain that? I think it's very relevant today because I think a lot of the challenges that our health systems are facing and that you are facing are complex, and that there isn't just one person, one organisation, not even one sector or one country that can actually change or reform the system on their own. I think a really good example of that is the digital transformation phase that we're all currently living in. We are finding that there are actors in the health space who actually come from outside of the health space, who are providing solutions, whether we want them or not. They are developing tools, they are working with health sector organisations, with the patient and living experience community, but not necessarily with them, but for them, and developing tools that are being used by people within the health sector. There's also a bit of a... there's like a little bit of a sort of 2 sides. So people quite often look at, or the digital space industry are sometimes looked at a little bit of skepticism, even maybe fear, and it's quite often of the unknown. So coming back to what you were saying earlier, working with people who sometimes you don't particularly want to work with, or hadn't envisaged working with before requires a lot of listening and getting that context. And through that listening and through that context, you can align by defining a common purpose. The motivations might be slightly different, but they need to be transparent. But once that common purpose has been established, then you can move forward together. There are some good examples, but not very many. One of the most obvious examples is during the COVID pandemic. I think a lot of countries had COVID apps where people and patients were putting in their data. It was influencing policy, it was influencing government decisions, it was influencing science. People were being formed over dashboards. But once that common purpose of trying to combat the pandemic had gone, that collaboration seemed to sort of just melt away. There are also other pockets and fragmented examples across, I appreciate this is a European example, not necessarily a global example, but there is the Cure SMA industry collaboration, which is a collaboration of academics, industry, the SMA community, governments, non-profits, and together they produce surveys such as what are the expectations, the experiences of people from the SMA community concerning clinical trials. And then together they produce data that is and can be used by the SMA community, but also used for industry, for pharma, and for influencing policy. And it's done transparently, it's done consensually, and it's done collaboratively. However, these are just two very short examples, and I think it just demonstrates we've got a lot of work to do here, but I'm sure that everybody here in the room has the experience and the tools to actually put that into action and maybe make a real difference.
Thank you, Louise. What we try to do here is to give you as much ammunition going forward into the sessions so that the key messages coming through from the panel can be acted upon. So in the design of this session, we've tried to give you as much as possible, but we also want to interact with you. And I think that what we've heard is that meaningful collaboration is happening. It's happening in communities, it's happening in institutions, it's happening across different collaborative models. But coming back to Ravi's point about the patient movement and the need for patient communities to come together around, not just in response to a pandemic or a global emergency, but to actually come together in the spirit of POF, but at the global level, is something that, yes, hasn't existed to date, but perhaps POF can be a channel for bringing the catalyst, the spark, the ignition for where we can identify those common agendas. So, but I will open it up to the floor. I know we have a couple of minutes. Rather than going back to the panelists, I'm eager to come back, but I will open it up for one or two questions, and then we'll finish with the panelists. So if there's one or two burning questions coming from the floor. There's one and two. Now three.
Hi there, my name is Lindsay McCauley. I'm the Director of Patient Engagement at Diabetes Action Canada, but this year I'm also the youth delegate for the Canadian delegation to the WHA. And I wanted to touch a little bit about, there was comments about how do we basically overrepresent the underrepresented. Sometimes that's young people in the context of this panel. And it's not lost on me that there's the desire to do so, but then the how is tangibly missing. I didn't even know that Canada brought young people to the World Health Assembly up until last year. I didn't even know what the World Health Assembly was, to be honest. And my question to all of you is, how do we actually move people who are the 50 and 60-year-olds, no shame, with the statins. I did hear the reaction in the crowd on that one. How do we move people to work together with young people to design what our path looks like to move forward? Because I think one of the biggest barriers so far has been that there's been a top-down desire to include young people. We want young people because we know they're missing, but then no one talks to young people about the application process or what's needed to be in the room or even what all the TLAs are, the three-letter acronyms. It's not lost on me that I had to Google a bunch of what you folks were saying today. So how do we move that partnership piece up in the leadership room so it's young people also co-designing what young patient engagement looks like as well?
Yeah. So first I want to highlight, because it is an important point that I forgot to say before, that indeed there are many things that we are not aware of as young patients. And for example, WHO has a youth council that they did the so they set 3 priorities for WHO, which was the health education and literacy, accessible and sustainable healthcare, and youth leadership and engagement, which was so hard to find. Like, I didn't find it. Ravi thankfully mentioned it in the speaker briefing. And I was not aware of it, even though I am an active young patient advocate. And this is what is missing, that we're not aware of things that are happening. So young patients can be inspired, they can create a movement, they can create a community that they can work together and change this system. And I feel that a lot of times, as we discussed also yesterday, the issue is this leadership fear of missing, this leadership from the older generation in patient organizations, for example, because patient organizations, I believe, can play a huge role in this systematic change in national, of course, but also in regional approaches. In Europe, EPF is helping that because they don't have a fear of losing the leadership. But in Greece, in my experience in the diabetes community, I had a very bad experience with the president of the federation, which I resigned from the board because they were not accepting the young voices. So we need to find a way to collaborate, but also to listen more to young patients so they can co-create. And I believe that if there are some opportunities that the young patient will hear about them, they will want to be part of that, because there are very strong young patient advocates around the world. And this example, like 30 seconds, okay? I see Derek looking at me. So this example can be in the diabetes community. As you know, we have the Nothing About Us Without Us that you mentioned, started from the disability patient group. But a very dear friend of ours that passed away yesterday, he created an organization and embraced this Nothing About Us Without Us, because in diabetes community, in a lot of medical conferences or ATTD, EASD, ADA, patients were not even part of that. And I'm not even talking about young patients, not even the patients themselves. It was only medical conferences. So he created spaces for patients to attend these conferences, and then young patients also. And you can see in these 6 years that the conferences themselves changed their agenda. They created more inclusive, oh yeah, okay, I'm done. Anyway, but it just changed the whole thing of how you think of a conference. And then these patients and the young patients, they were bringing, because Bastian was saying paid forward, so they were bringing it back to the community. And then the communities were building a momentum, they were building something bigger because of these conferences. And this is a very small part, but we can all be inspired by these big conversations. So we can all be inspired when we know about them.
If I may just summarize that.
If I may.
Yeah. If you may, yes.
Yes. So there are 3 parallel sessions about to start just after us. So I would like to finish on time so that I don't get the daggers in my back. But as moderator, I don't know is there a point you want to come back
Yeah,
on?
all I just wanted to say is one thing that we've seen nationally work is for every chair position, have a youth co-chair. Institutionalize leadership for young people anywhere that there's leadership for not young people.
Thank you. Great point. So, and thank you both. I know there was Tamas, you had a question?
Yeah, my name is Tamas Beretsky. I'm here with you, Patty, and I'm also a person with HIV, so thank you, Ravi, for acknowledging. One comment there is that right in these days, these months, the communities of people living with HIV and at risk of HIV are actively being thrown under the bus. So all of that legacy is crumbling before our eyes, which leads me to my actual question. Now, yes, we need a global patient movement. How is that supposed to happen when we see that monies are actively dissipating from any kind of civil society involvement across the board, especially in health, not just in HIV, everywhere else? All our organizations are suffering from the same thing. Projects are vanishing. Funding is stopped by the EU. UNAIDS is being sunset, which is a euphemism for being closed down. The WHO is lacking funds. How are we supposed to do this? Because we've been working as volunteers, many of us, for decades. How much more volunteer work are we supposed to do while we clearly see that this is not a priority? Sorry.
Please.
All right. Nobody wants to fund what doesn't yet exist, right? And I fully sympathize with you. In my personal life, I am overstretched because I love the pro bono work I do. And I work as much as I can so that I can still pay my school fees and everything for my kids and also do the passion work. And it's an unfair tax on all of our time to have to do this extra work to make something happen. At the same time, the best resource we have is the passion we have. And that's not something to be ignored. We will find allies. I'm not saying that I have a solution on this, right? We will find allies. There are several sessions on the agenda that will be talking about what do we need to do to create a movement among ourselves. And I encourage all of us to just have those kind of discussions in session and outside at lunch and in the corridors. There's another point also, because it's a serious question here. I think it also gets to what Derek was talking about at the very beginning in terms of the leadership that we bring. The easiest thing to do with civil society is to divide us. And an example is if I work in vitiligo or ovarian cancer or pulmonary fibrosis, and you work on something else, and we're sitting down and we're discussing with a health authority about how to budget things. You argue your point, argue my point, and that person is satisfied because they don't have to listen to either one of us. We're going to fight with each other. It's not just that we're stronger together. We're only strong when we are together. And I think that's something that we need to take while we're here in Sevilla and bring it back to our own communities and constituencies. Because we may not have extra funding or resources to create a movement, but if we build it into what we have right now and make sure that I listen to you and I say, yes, I don't have to have the health challenges you have in order to respect you and make sure that you are part of my agenda and that I am not just talking my own points, but I'm bringing in yours. That's maybe the first step that we can do. And then let's take it from there and meet next year.
Thank you, Ravi. And thank you, everybody, for your questions and for the panelists. I think we're well over time, but we got there in the end. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, including Bethany. All of our panelists are here for the entirety of POF, so if you do wish to follow up with any individual question, please do so. We are now going to transfer into our parallel sessions, but before we do, I just want to re-emphasize probably the point that you've had on your registration desk about registering for My Synapse. It's where the kind of connectivity that we've had in the room can happen in a complementary way digitally. Synapse is probably the largest global platform. It's not for patient engagement. It's not just for POF. It has a huge amount of resources, of connectivity that's there to be utilized, and it's open and it's free. I encourage everybody to utilize it. So we'll just move to the parallel sessions. Just a quick area of logistics. So the Ibiza rooms are out towards the Mallorca where we gathered for lunch. They're just to the right of that. The Sevilla room is upstairs, and it's down at the back of the reception desk on the right-hand side. And then the patient expert one is in here. So get to work, everybody.